FishingTheChehalis.net has dedicated Volume 2 in the Creative Accounting series to a controversial practice used by the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife that combines multiple stocks of chum salmon into a fictitious species known to the department as the Grace Harbor Chum. Volume 2 will explain how it's done and offer a possible motivation for Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife to use this unusual concept in Grace Harbor and its river tributaries. 215 miles long, the Chehalis River is Washington's second largest river. Along the way, the Skookumchuck joins it near Centralia. Then the Black near Oakville, the Satsip near Elma, the Wynoochee in Montesano, and the Wishkah in downtown Aberdeen. Coming in on the north side of the bay is the Hump Tulips. From the south comes in Johns River. It is important to note that while these rivers are all in western Washington, they are different rivers containing different stocks of fish. As an example, the upper reaches of the Chehalis starts out near PL in Lewis County. It's joined by the Newaycum over by Chehalis. From the north in Thurston County comes the Skookumchuck, and then the Black River. The Coquitlam flows out of Mason County to enter at Elma. The Satsip first gained national attention when hippies at the Satsip Rock Festival bathed in it back in 1971. By 1977, the name Satsip became associated with the never-completed nuclear plant overlooking the river on Fuller Hill. With its headwaters back in the high country to the north, the Satsip is a fisherman's dream river. The West Fork of the Satsip is also home to the volunteer-operated hatchery at Satsip Springs and the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife hatchery on Bingham Creek. We'll come back to revisit the role and effect of the hatchery shortly. The Wynoochee also flows in from the high country to the north. Near its headwaters, 28 miles north of Montesano, is a power-producing dam owned by the city of Aberdeen, which uses the reservoir for water supply. Isolated by a lack of a fish ladder, Wynoochee Lake sits behind the dam. WDFW's failure to provide the agreed-upon mitigation for the loss of the habitat is another sore spot for many, and is covered in the Dam series on FishingTheChehalis.net. The Wishkah first gained national attention when the ashes of rock star Kurt Cobain were scattered in the river. Coming also from the north, the Wishkah enters the Chehalis in Aberdeen near the 101 Bridge. Coming out of the foothills of the Olympic Mountains on the peninsula, the Hump Tulips is a winding river known as many as one heck of a salmon and steelhead stream. It is also popular as a summer float during the warm weather. The Hump, as it's locally known, is also home to a WDFW hatchery. We'll revisit this hatchery as well in the near future. Entering Grace Harbor on its south side, Johns River is a shorter and more of a lowland river. It's often remembered by tourists traveling the 101 as the location of the Ocean Spray cranberry plant located near the mouth of the river. Salmon entering coastal rivers are part of a group of salmonoid called Pacific salmon that range from Japan and Russia to the west, Alaska to the north, and south down the North American coast to northern California. Within the group are different species of salmon, known as Chinook, Chum, Coho, and Pink, usually associated with the river in which it returns as an adult. Within each of the species are different stocks that are different from each other. Let's use the state's largest river, the Columbia, as an example. The coho found throughout the river and all of its tributaries are of the same species of Pacific salmon. The coho returning each year to the Willamette River near Portland are one of the stocks found within the Columbia. Those coho that travel further upstream to the Rogue River is yet another stock. Different than either of the other two are the hardy coho that travel all the way up to the Snake. Anyone who ever picked up a package of farm-raised salmon with the color added label can probably attest to the fact that all salmon are not the same. The way the salmon is raised can create yet another group of stocks within the same species in the same river. As an example, a wild-spawning coho is one stock, and a coho released from a hatchery into the same river is yet another stock. Each year when setting the harvest season, WDFW makes public presentations on how many fish of each stock are expected within each river, the number of escapement required to replenish that stock, and the remainder that would be available for harvest. Acquired by fishingthechehalis.net in a public document request, the PowerPoint presentation used by the department in 2012 shows how it manages in the hump tulips for the wild spawning Chinook to ensure adequate numbers of wild fish escape capture to return to the spawning grounds. On another slide, the department shows return and escapement again, but this time for the hatchery stock of Chinook in the hump. This time the escapement goal is set to simply get enough fish back to the hatchery so the egg harvest is adequate for the hatchery production to meet its goals the following year. Another example of how different stocks are recognized river by river, the department shows the individual escapement history for wild spawning coho in the rivers flowing directly into Grays Harbor on the north and south shores. Turning to the east, the department then shows the tributaries of the Chehalis that join it on the lower end. Finally, the presentation by WDFW breaks down the return for each stock of wild spawning coho that return to the tributaries that are located in the upper reaches of the Chehalis. Now comes the time for you to meet the mysterious and fictitious stock known to the department as the Grays Harbor Chum. Further review of the presentation by Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife found a single slide that says it all. Remember those 16 different stocks of coho that you just watched on those slides? Breaking ranks with common sense, the best available science, and its own management practice with other stock in the Chehalis Basin, WDFW combines every stock of chum from all rivers, hatchery and wild, into one single stock. Since a salmon stock is usually known by the name of the water with which it spawns, the question that immediately rises is, do the chum only spawn in Grays Harbor? The answer is no. Salmon don't spawn in salt water. They spawn in all the freshwater rivers flowing into Grays Harbor, just like the Chinook and coho. At least the stocks of real chum used to anyway. That makes it impossible for there to be such a thing as a Grays Harbor chum. In case you're curious, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife is fully aware that chum historically spawned in these rivers, just like the Chinook and the coho. As example, fishingthechehalis.net reviewed Department of Ecology logs that found WDFW files showed chum spawning up in Thurston County in Prairie Creek near Grand Mound, 20 miles south of Olympia in Scatter Creek, and up into the Skookumchuck River. They were also found to be spawning in Miller Swamp and Hope Creek in Lewis County. Moving over to the black, the Onalaska Future Farmers of America has had a broodstocking program for chum. In 2004, the Hatchery Scientific Review Group within WDFW issued an annual report on state hatcheries and enhancement projects. It recognized that adults are netted by the Chehalis Indian tribe at Black River and transported live to Onalaska High School, where they are incubated, put into hatch boxes, and released into Gear Creek on the south fork of the Newaycom River by the FFA. Recognizing the students should be taught that a broodstock captured in a particular stream should be returned to the stream of origin to avoid commingling with another stock, the HSRG recommended releasing the fish back to the river of origin, the Black River. Apparently adopting the "if I say it so, then it must be so" attitude, WDFW management rebukes its own scientific review group and admits it intentionally and deliberately decided that all the chum stocks in all the rivers would be considered as a single stock regardless of stream of origin while spawning or hatchery raised. Even more remarkably, management takes this position with the full knowledge that the population viability of the Gear Creek chum, which apparently doesn't exist in their minds at that point, is listed at risk. Due to the department's intentional actions to not account separately for the different stocks of chum, it is hard to determine exactly how far down the tube those upland chum stocks have deplenished. However, it is not hard to find evidence that large numbers existed in the past. One example is an email string between the Quinault Indian Nation and WDFW management. The representative of the QIN is trying to gauge the potential impacts on spawning stocks if a new dam for flood control is built near PL. He states, "Also, could you check page 65 of the attached report? When I see the former magnitude of the Chehalis tribe catch, see footnotes, I have to believe upriver chum spawning was important, so any chum type of habitat that still exists should be looked at in my view." One is left wondering whether or not WDFW's decision to call all the chum stocks a single stock is sweeping a problem under the rug. They know substantial chum runs used to exist upriver, and they knew that many were at risk. So, by combining them together, out of sight, out of mind. How large a rug is needed? On March 4, 2012, FishingTheChehalis.net founder Dave Hamilton asked Fisheries Management for a breakdown of the chum escapement by tributary for the Chehalis. The response was yippee, as Region 6 manager Ron Warren passed the buck to Kurt Hughes. Mr. Hughes responded with, quote, "We don't even have trib-level escapements in Grace Harbor, except Stevens Creek and in the Satsum. We appreciate your patience, but stay with us now. The plot is about to thicken, as they say." Remember those hatcheries we promised to revisit earlier? Well, they are on Stevens Creek in the Hump and the East Fork of the Satsum, where Mr. Hughes does the math. Both have chum enhancement projects, so the department goes into two small areas with more chum than found anywhere else and uses those two somewhat unique little locations as an indicator of what is happening with chum spawning 215 miles away. You'll notice that under this system, all the chum stocks upstream from the Satsum, such as the Coquitlam, Black, Skookumchuck, could become extinct and it would fly right below the radar because the department has named all of them one stock. Why is this happening? It's time to break the code, as they say. The red line on this presentation slide shows the combined escapement goal for all the stocks of wild spawning coho found in Grace Harbor tributaries. The white bars show the run size expected. You'll notice that the run size exceeds the escapement, allowing WDFW to set a season for harvesting. This next slide is the same for hatchery coho. As we pointed out earlier, the only escapement needed is for egg harvest goals. This leaves large numbers of hatchery fish available for harvest. When combined, the wild spawning and hatchery coho create an abundant species in the Chehalis Basin. The next challenge is how to get to those abundant coho. They will be traveling with the less abundant Chinook and chum. As one tries to target the coho, it will create significant impacts on the chum. While the chum numbers are somewhat okay in the hump and the satsop due to brood stocking and other enhancements we've pointed out, the impacts could show at-risk stocks dragged down to threatened or other status that could require massive reductions in commercial harvesting. So the solution is to simply not count them separately, which disguises any problems with stocks that are currently or in the future placed at risk. Is there an alternative to creative accounting? Yes. Simply practice avoidance as preached by Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife on its own website. One would target the abundant stocks in those geographical areas where the stocks at risk are known not to be found. If one were to avoid the chum in the bay or in the lower Chehalis, the abundant stocks can be targeted after they enter the hump and the satsop. Those at risk stocks from the upper Chehalis needing to proceed on upriver will swim right by the mouth of the satsop on their way to the spawning grounds. Any recreational fisher that hooks onto one east of the mouth of the satsop can be required to release it so it can continue its journey. Now for the punchline. This last presentation slide shows how total chum escapement in Grace Harbor and its tributaries has fallen dangerously below escapement goals 6 out of 9 recent years. During this time, WDFW management has known it can harvest the abundant coho and even hump and satsop chum by simply restricting harvest to those geographical areas that avoid impacting the chum stocks that are at risk. So why didn't they do it? You'll get the answer in Volume 3 of this series, but guess which group of fishers caught 70% of the fish as they were commingled together in the bay in the lower end of the Chehalis? Oh my! Fishing in geographical areas that avoid the stocks at risk might prove a little challenging for a boat that size with a couple hundred feet of net hanging off its stern now, wouldn't it? It sure seems that the Department of Fish and Wildlife is willing to push the envelope and establish commercial seasons to target abundant stocks at the expense of the struggling stocks. Why is it that fishingthechehalis.net is so confident that WDFW and the Commission are fully aware that the season set for commercial fishing is targeting the abundant stocks, but damaging the chum and other stocks upriver that are struggling? Well, you be the judge. Available for downloading in the Fishy Leaks library on fishingthechehalis.net, the Chehalis Basin Fisheries Task Force and WDFW combined in 2003 to commission a study of the current condition of stocks in the Grace Harbor tributaries by Mobrand Biometrics Incorporated. On page 125 of the report, one finds a performance chart. That chart breaks down the mysterious Grace Harbor chum into different river stocks. You notice the charts show a percentage of change in abundance of its chums in the different rivers, with the Hump, Hoquiam, Wishkah, and South Bay abundance down approximately 60%. The rest of the Chehalis is down close to 80%, even though it includes the enhanced satsop. On page 153, the report addresses the issue of, quote, low productivity of Chehalis chum upstream of Coquitlam Creek, which is near Elma, with recommendations of initiate supplementation using native stocks to help offset pressure on population persistence associated with poor habitat quality, and commercial fishing targeted Wainuchi and satsop components of chum population. As far as fishing and Chehalis.net is concerned, it couldn't be any clearer than that. The at-risk chum stocks of the upper Chehalis and other portions of the system are magically erased as if they never existed, only to be replaced by the fictitious Gray's Harbor Chum, which everyone knows by its name alone cannot possibly exist. We hope you could take the time to complete the Creative Counting series by moving on to Volume 3. You'll learn how an impression of fairness regarding the division of the salmon available for harvest can be presented if one first divides a single commercial fishery into 3. Now isn't that creative? This time we're going to divide instead of add together. Effective at disguising 70% of the available salmon are being caught in a net. It's slicker than a magician doing card tricks at a carnival. We hope you get a chance to catch it.